Emergency. Batman speaking. Warning all of you to brace yourselves for big news.
This is Special Session, and I'm your host, Brian Schott. We're back. I have to apologize for no episode last week. Allergies were killing me, and I couldn't talk, and that's not exactly an ideal situation for the podcasting medium. My voice was gone. I tried to record several times, and my voice would just give out, so I have to apologize. We didn't have an episode last week, but we are back. But I am now hopped up on Claritin, Nasonex, and raring to get back to talking about the news of the week from Utah politics. I'm pretty certain those aren't classified as performance-enhancing drugs, but if they are, let's just keep that between ourselves, okay? Let's get into the news from the past week. Since he's not running for re-election in 2027, I've been wondering a little bit about what legacy Governor Spencer Cox will leave behind once he leaves office. And I don't think he wants to be known as the governor who lost the Sundance Film Festival, but that's where we are. On Thursday, the Sundance Film Festival, which has been in Utah since its inception, in Park City since it started more than 40 years ago, it is packing up and leaving the state for Boulder, Colorado after next year's festival. The 2026 festival will be the final festival in Utah. And this is a big deal. When you think of Utah on the global stage, there's not a lot that comes to mind. There's obviously the LDS Church, obviously skiing. One of the things that people think about is the Sundance Film Festival. It's synonymous with Utah. Not anymore. This is a huge blow for the state for a number of reasons. One, public perception. Like I just said, the Sundance Film Festival was synonymous with Utah since it started more than 4 decades ago. People don't know a lot about the state, but they knew the Sundance Film Festival. That's over with. Like it or not, fair or not, that's going to be part of the legacy for Governor Spencer Cox's time in office. Sundance Film Festival decided to leave. The state tried to keep them here. Lawmakers put $3.5 million in next year's budget to try and entice them to stay. You'll remember after this year's festival ended, the legislature and the governor took out a full-page ad in the Los Angeles Times, essentially begging the film festival to stay in the state. That didn't happen. We can speculate about the reasons all we want. Colorado was offering a very large economic incentive package. They're talking about some tax incentives for the festival. And now that it's moving to Boulder, Colorado, that's probably one of the reasons. There was also some reporting a couple of weeks ago that some board members or some of the leaders of the Sundance Film Festival had expressed some concern over the pride flag bill that was passed by lawmakers in this last session. They felt like that didn't send the right message. And that may not be the entire reason, but it's probably part of the reason, because the film industry is an inclusive environment. It's an inclusive industry. And for the state to ban pride flags in classrooms and on public buildings, for the state to take that move, that's sticking their finger in the eye of this industry. And so while I don't think that that's the primary reason why they left, I think it played a factor. And it's really hard to argue that it doesn't. It's easy to draw a line between those two things. Economically, this is a hit for the state. In 2024, the festival brought in an estimated $132 million worth of economic activity. There were almost 2,000 jobs created from it, almost $15 million in tax revenue. That's going to be very hard for the state to replace. That's not something that they can just wave a magic wand and make up with it with tourism dollars or skiing dollars or what have you. It's going to be very, very difficult for the state to make this up. They're going to feel that. The state is going to notice this absence until something takes its place, if something takes its place. Governor Cox said that he's already talking with stakeholders about a new film festival that will celebrate the state's culture and heritage. I'll believe it when I see it. Sundance has a cachet. There's a lot of film festivals now. There's a ton of them. When Sundance first started, it was really a unique thing. And yeah, a lot of other festivals have popped up, but Sundance still has some cachet to it. A new film festival in Utah is just going to be like every other film festival. Get in line. I sincerely doubt that Governor Cox is going to be able to wave a magic wand, say, here's our new festival, and then replace $132 million in economic activity. It just doesn't happen. So don't hold your breath. Make no bones about it. This is a black eye for Utah to lose something that people around the world associated with the state. And now it's heading to Colorado. There's some legislative leaders, there's some lawmakers who I've seen saying, well, you know, the outdoor retailers show left the state for a few years, went to Colorado, and then they realized they made a mistake and came back. The outdoor retailer show, as it exists now, is nowhere near what it was during its heyday in Utah. A lot of the big retailers have left. A lot of the big brands have left. It is a shadow of its former self. It is not the same kind of event that the outdoor retailer show that was in Utah before it left for Colorado was. So that's really not a good argument to make that Sundance will someday realize its mistake and come back. And who knows, maybe this is a mistake by Sundance. Maybe leaving Utah is a mistake and they just become another film festival now that they're moving to Boulder, Colorado. Nobody can say. But what we do know is that something that brought a lot of attention to the state, something that was synonymous with the state, something that brought a lot of economic activity to the state, is now heading elsewhere. And Governor Spencer Cox was the person in charge when that happened. Here's another first for the state of Utah. They're now the first state in the union to have a law banning pride flags in classrooms and in public buildings. On Thursday night, just hours before the deadline for him to take final action on bills passed during the 2025 legislative session, Utah Governor Spencer Cox allowed HB 77 to go into a law without his signature. HB 77 from Representative Trevor Lee only allows the display of flags from an approved list of flags written into the bill to be displayed in classrooms and on government property. But for all intents and purposes, this bill was designed to ban the display of pride flags in classrooms. It was later expanded for all government buildings, but this bill is the culmination of a couple of years-long effort by Republican lawmakers to ban pride flags in classrooms. That's what this was. And Governor Spencer Cox, in his letter explaining his action, said that he was unhappy with where the bill ended up. He said that he thinks there's a lot of problems with the bill, but he didn't veto it because he was confident that his veto would have been overridden. And yeah, it probably would have. Couple of things about that decision. One, I don't think the governor wanted to put a huge spotlight on the state by vetoing this bill. Can you imagine how much media attention there would be if the governor vetoed this bill banning pride flags and then lawmakers had to come back to the state capitol to hold a veto override session where they would most certainly vote to say, yeah, we want to ban pride flags. I'm pretty sure the governor didn't want to put that kind of spotlight on his state. I also think he didn't want any of the heat that would come his way from right-wing media. Can you imagine the howls of protests that would come from Fox News and Breitbart and right-wing podcasts? If he were to veto this bill, he's still viewed very suspiciously by a lot of hardcore Republicans, even though he went full MAGA late last year. For years, he was opposed to Donald Trump. He didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2020. He didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. He has said he disagrees with the president. All of a sudden, last summer, he flipped on a dime and endorsed the president after there was the attempted assassination during one of his campaign rallies. And if he were to veto this bill, all of that would go out the window. He's trying to get back in good graces with the mainstream of the Republican Party, which is MAGA right now. And if he were to veto this bill, that would not have helped his case. He didn't want any of that smoke. He didn't want the heat that would come his way because of this. I also believe that the governor thinks this allows him to have it both ways on this issue. In his letter, he says it's one of the most divisive bills of the session. He's deeply disappointed that this was the final version. There's a lot of problems with the bill, in his opinion, which all sounds good. It sounds like he's very concerned about this, but he didn't veto it. It's clearly a case of fence sitting by the governor. He clearly did the calculation that he didn't want to provoke a fight with lawmakers. This is a fight that he would have lost, and he didn't want to do that. And he didn't want the attention that would come from that, and he didn't want the heat that would come from that. There's a couple of laughable things in his letter that I wanted to point out. One, he says he urges lawmakers to consider common sense solutions that address the bill's numerous flaws. If you think that the Republican-controlled legislature, as it currently exists, is going to come back in and try to make changes to this bill, I don't know what you're smoking, Governor, but that's not going to happen. The only way that this law ever changes is if someone successfully challenges it in court. Also in his letter, he says he finds it strange that no headline reads MAGA flags banned from classrooms. The reason why headlines say pride flags banned from classrooms? Because that's what the bill was intended to do. The bill's sponsor, Representative Trevor Lee, I've had tape of him saying that's what he wanted to do. This legislation was clearly targeted at pride flags in classrooms. So to shake your finger at the media and say, well, why aren't you saying that it bans MAGA flags? That's not the reason for the bill in the first place. The reason was it was targeting pride flags. I know that that's an inconvenient fact for you, but that's what the bill's motivation was. Yes, MAGA flags are banned in classrooms under this bill, but I don't remember a lot of protests in Utah. I don't remember a lot of parents raising hell about MAGA flags in the classroom. They raised hell about pride flags in the classroom. They got mad, yelled at teachers, yelled at school board meetings because of pride flags in the classroom. And that's the reason behind this bill. So shaking your finger at the media over this is really a bad faith argument. Not only is Utah the first state to ban pride flags in classrooms and in public buildings, but also we're the first state to now completely ban fluoride in the drinking water. On Thursday evening, Governor Spencer Cox signed HB 81 from Representative Stephanie Grecius that bans fluoride in any drinking water system in the state. In 1976, Utah voters approved a ballot measure that banned fluoride in the water unless voters approved it at the ballot box. Right now, only 2 counties have fluoridated water, Salt Lake and Davis County. Lawmakers passed this bill over the objections of dental health experts and other medical experts, and they passed it because parents were arguing that this was somehow a parents' rights issue, with most of the state not having fluoridated water. A new poll shows that most Utahns didn't want this to happen, but lawmakers passed the bill anyway. Noble Predictive Insights, we've had Mike Noble on the podcast before. They have been one of the most accurate pollsters in Utah over the last couple of years. They gave Utah voters 3 statements and asked them which one was closest to their position. The first statement was, fluoride is added to tap water in almost every state. It has dental health benefits and no negative effects. It should be in the water. 32% of Utah voters agree with that statement. The next statement was, fluoride is good for dental health, but local government should be able to choose whether it's in the water. 34% of Utah voters said that they agreed with that statement. The last statement was, fluoride has negative effects and should not be added to drinking water. Just 20% of Utah voters agreed with that statement. So if you look at these poll results, 2/3 of Utahns, 2/3 of Utah voters believe that fluoride should be allowed in the water because there are some benefits, although some of them say it should be up to local governments, which is how Utah's law was before this bill got passed. Just 1 in 5 Utah voters support what lawmakers did, but they went ahead and did it anyway statewide. The bill's sponsor, Representative Stephanie Grecius, she represents Utah County. Utah County does not have fluoridated water. She says that this issue was brought to her by a constituent who would have to have lived in Utah County. Utah County does not have fluoridated water. So the sponsor of the bill and the alleged inspiration for this bill are not affected by this issue anyway. They're not affected at all. But they pushed this bill through, and Utah is now becoming the first state to ban fluoride in the water. Grecius's claims that this came from a constituent are a bit suspect because, and I've told you this before and I've reported on this before, back in November of last year, Corinne Johnson, who is the president of the far-right parents' rights group, Utah Parents United, I have her on tape during an online meeting with another right-wing group, Utah Citizens for the Constitution. I have her on tape saying that this bill was one of her big priorities.
The next one you're going to love, this one. There's going to be a piece of legislation that is going to be removing fluoride from the water in Utah. We are so supportive of health initiatives here in the state of Utah that allow parents to make medical decisions for their children. So we've been pushing for this legislation since we fought masks and vaccines, and we started seeing everything that's happening.
After hearing that, it's kind of hard to believe that this came from a constituent, unless that constituent just happened to be somebody involved with Utah Parents United. But the Republican-controlled legislature decided to pass this law statewide, even though it's only supported by 1 in 5 Utah voters. Are you a fan of Utah's vote-by-mail system? Too bad. Bye-bye. So long. It's over with. Governor Spencer Cox has signed HB 300 into law, and what that does is it changes Utah's universal vote-by-mail to a system where you have to opt in to get your ballot via mail. As you know, election integrity has been a big thing for Republicans ever since Donald Trump falsely claimed that he was cheated out of the win in the 2020 election, despite zero evidence to support that contention. Under the bill, you're going to have to opt in to get a ballot by mail. When you send it back in, you're going to have to include the last 4 digits of your driver's license or your state ID, and your ballot must arrive at the election center by election day. And that means if your ballot arrives afterwards, if there's a delay in the mail, if you mail it at the last second and it doesn't get there, it's not going to be counted. People who do that are going to be disenfranchised. I'm old enough to remember last year when voters in the Republican primary between Celeste Malloy and Colby Jenkins in rural areas mailed their ballots at the last second, and there was a delay because they were sent to Las Vegas first, and those voters didn't get their votes counted. And people were screaming disenfranchisement. I'm old enough to remember when that happened. This is going to, it's unavoidable. This is going to happen more often with this bill. Utah was one of 8 states that offered universal vote by mail. It was praised. People loved it. It led to higher turnout. You cannot argue that that's not what happened. But because of all of these false claims, falsehoods, lies about a stolen election in 2020, about massive voter fraud that has never been proven at all, Utah lawmakers decided this year to scrap the whole system. Critics argue that this change could dampen voter turnout. Some voters might not get their ballots. You opt in and it gets lost in the mail. You might not get your ballot, and then you don't go vote in person. When the bill was first introduced, you would be able to get your ballot by mail, but you'd have to turn it in person and show ID, because that would help eliminate voter fraud, which really doesn't happen here in Utah. They're investigating a couple of cases where people might have voted for someone who was deceased. And you've heard county clerks give testimony saying they've talked to the parents of missionaries who signed their ballot for them, which is election fraud. They won't answer my questions about whether or not they turned anyone in when the person told them that they committed election fraud. But this is meant to increase the security of elections. In his most recent televised press conference, Governor Spencer Cox was asked about this bill, and he said this.
Our elections are secure. We have incredible elections here in the state of Utah, and yet there are a lot of people who have lost faith in, there are bad actors that have caused that to happen. I disagree with that, but it has happened. And so anything we can do to help people have more faith, restore their faith in Utah's elections, we should be doing that.
Let's break that down, because that answer doesn't make any sense when you think about it for like 5 seconds. The governor says that people have lost confidence in elections. And then he acknowledges that it's bad actors who have caused the loss in confidence in those elections. Well, that's true. People who have been lying about massive voter fraud, conspiracy theories about massive voter fraud, have caused mostly Republicans to say they've lost confidence in elections. If you are bombarded with baseless claims of election fraud that have never been proven, by the way, but if you're bombarded with that, it's natural that some people are going to start to believe it. And that's why they have lost confidence in their elections. But then he said he supported the bill because it would help restore that confidence. But that confidence was diminished because of bad actors, because of people who are lying about election fraud. Essentially, what he's saying, his argument is people are lying about non-existent election fraud. And because some people are believing those lies about non-existent election fraud, we're going to reward those lies about non-existent election fraud. So they're rewarding the bad actors. And that creates an incentive structure for these bad actors to continue making bad faith arguments on other issues, because they know that if they can be loud enough, if they can get enough people to believe their baseless claims, their conspiracy theories, they can probably get lawmakers and Utah's governor to play along and make a change to state law. Almost all of the action from the 2025 legislature is over, but there's still one issue pending, and that is the referendum effort to try and overturn HB 267, which was the union-busting bill that takes away the collective bargaining rights for public sector employees. A group of labor unions have launched an effort, a signature gathering effort, to put the issue on the ballot where voters will get a chance to vote up or down. And on Friday, that coalition of union groups announced that they had already collected almost 130,000 signatures, which is really impressive. They need to collect around 140,000 signatures, which represents 8% of the active voters in the state. But not only that, they have to hit that 8% threshold in 15 of the state's 29 counties. But 130,000 signatures over the first 2 weeks of their referendum effort is fairly impressive. If they do get enough signatures, then the law goes on hold until it goes up for an election. And if voters vote it down at the ballot box, then it doesn't go into effect at all. At the same time, there is a parallel effort by Americans for Prosperity. That is the conservative group where they are trying to get Utah voters to decline to sign. That's their slogan. And they're putting a lot of resources towards this. I find it a bit ironic that lawmakers, legislative leaders have been wringing their hands about all of the outside money that could be coming into the state to put ballot initiatives on the ballot, to pass laws that way. They're very worried about outside money influencing Utah politics. But we've heard nary a peep about all of the money that Americans for Prosperity have been spending to try and thwart this attempt, to try and stop the petition effort from getting on the ballot. I guess it depends on which side that money is supporting. Anyway, this union group, they have until April 14th to collect enough signatures, and that's not the end of the process. Those signatures then have to be verified. And under Utah law, everyone who signs the petition, their names will be published online, and there will likely be an effort to contact some of those people to get them to remove their name from the petition, which is also part of Utah law. So even if they get to the 140,000, and remember, the 140,000 signatures, that's just the minimum threshold. So according to a news release that they sent, they're going to push past that. They're going to try to get as many signatures as possible, try to get enough of a cushion, because signatures will be thrown out when they're validated. People won't be registered voters, so those signatures will be invalidated. I'm sure there'll be some signatures that will be challenged, and there will be an effort to try to get people to remove their names from the petition. So you need a large enough cushion in order to meet that 140,000 threshold. They've got just over 2 weeks left to do it as we're recording. It will be fascinating to see what comes of this. If you remember back in 2019, Utah lawmakers passed a massive tax reform package that would add sales taxes to a number of services. And people were against that. There was a referendum effort launched, and they were able to get enough signatures to put this on the ballot. So lawmakers came into session and just repealed the bill because they didn't want to get spanked at the polls because this thing was likely going to be overturned. And back in 2007, I believe, lawmakers passed a school vouchers program. The teachers union, the UEA, mobilized, and they got enough signatures to put that on the ballot, and that was also overturned through a referendum. If there's one thing you can say about this legislature, they do not like to be told no. They do not like having their actions overturned. They don't like being rejected. So you wonder if they get enough signatures to put this thing on the ballot, if the referendum effort is successful, whether or not lawmakers will do what they did in 2019 and just repeal the law before voters get their say on the issue. Time to give you an update on my lawsuit against the Utah Legislature for denying me a press credential. Just to get you up to speed, I'm suing the Utah Legislature in federal court. Last year, they changed their guidelines for media credentials, saying that independent organizations, independent journalists cannot be given a media credential. I filed suit on First Amendment grounds because it appears the rules were changed to specifically target me once I launched this independent publication, Utah Political Watch, and that they are not implementing these rules fairly or consistently. And recently I came across a pretty big piece of evidence that suggests that that's exactly what happened, that they changed those rules to specifically exclude me from getting a media credential. I had someone reach out to me via TikTok, someone with a DM on TikTok saying they had a recording that I would want to listen to. And so they sent it to me, and when I listened to it, my jaw hit the floor. This person's daughter was part of a school trip to the Capitol, and they were meeting with Senator Todd Weiler, Republican Senator Todd Weiler. The recording starts midway through one of Weiler's answers. He's talking about the media, and you'll hear him say, they don't like it that we get together and talk. They can't listen to us, so they write horrible things about our secret meetings in here. This person's daughter then asks a question about my case. Take a listen to the tape.
They don't like it that we get together and talk, and they can't listen to us, so they write horrible things about our secret meetings in here. Yes?
I do have a question about that, though.
Yeah.
If you would be able to answer, why are independent journalists not part of the media in Utah anymore?
Well, I think that there's only one independent journalist that wasn't given credentials this year, and he has kind of burned some bridges with some of the House and Senate leadership. They don't feel like he's particularly honest, and I was not part of that decision. If it were my decision, I would have credentialed him. But it's one person, and he's screaming foul, and I think the legislative leadership is showing who's the boss. So I think that's what's going on.
So
but he can still come up here like you can. He can still come up here and sit in the gallery. He's just not giving special journalist privileges. He likes to kind of poke people in the eyes, and if you do that long enough, sometimes it comes back at you. And in my opinion, that's what happened. But that's a really good question.
So Weiler says there was only one independent journalist that wasn't given credentials this year. That's me. He says that this person has kind of burned some bridges with some of the House and Senate leadership. They don't feel like I'm particularly honest, and they denied me a press credential to show me who's boss. I reached out to Weiler about this. He confirmed that it's him in the recording. He confirmed that he said those things, and it's 100% clear that he's talking about me. This recording is now part of my lawsuit against the legislature because it appears to confirm that these rules were changed to retaliate against me because they don't like what I write, because they object to some of the things that I write critical pieces of them, and they decided to retaliate against me and not give me a credential to cover the 2025 legislative session. Development number 2 in my lawsuit. I told you before that the legislature has hired an outside firm, a boutique Washington, D.C. law firm, to represent them in this case, Consovoy McCarthy. It is the same law firm that is representing the legislature in the gerrymandering lawsuit. And we know that that's expensive for them to do, but we didn't really know how expensive until recently. And it was Democratic Senator Nate Bloom who pointed this out. But on the legislative website is the contract with Consovoy McCarthy for this case. And their lawyers, there are 4 lawyers listed on this contract, and they are charging the legislature, really they're charging taxpayers, between $650 and $700 an hour to represent them in this case. And that's probably the same thing that they're charging the legislature in the gerrymandering case. And just to give you an example of how much that's costing, this week I had to sit down for a sworn deposition in my lawsuit, meaning their lawyers got to question me. The deposition took a little more than 4 hours. The associate who was there was one of the junior associates with Consovoy McCarthy, earning $650 an hour. If you do the math, that's more than $2,600 in fees for the Utah Legislature, Utah taxpayers, to depose me in this case. But it's not only that. There's the prep time for several hours worth of questions for this deposition. The research, things involved in that. The price tag for that deposition probably ran in the tens of thousands of dollars. And we're not done. Next month, 2 legislative staffers are going to sit down for depositions from my lawyers, from the Institute for Free Speech. And those depositions will each take several hours, and their lawyers will have to prepare them for those depositions, get them ready for what they anticipate will be asked. That will take several hours. That's more money. The meter continues to run on this. I looked at spending for the Utah Legislature, and so far, just this year, just in 2025, the legislature has spent $235,000 on Consovoy McCarthy, $235,000 to this outside law firm. I would estimate about 2/3 of that is for the gerrymandering lawsuit, about 1/3 of that is for my lawsuit. But still, $235,000 of taxpayer money going to this outside law firm to defend against lawsuits when they have their own lawyers on staff with legislative research and general counsel, when they have the Attorney General's office who normally handles this sort of thing. They've decided to shovel money to this outside law firm to defend them in this lawsuit. $235,000, and I pulled those numbers before the deposition, so we probably haven't seen a billing cycle for that. They'll probably get an invoice for that next month, but that's a lot of money going to this outside law firm. And a related development, the Society of Professional Journalists gave the Utah State Legislature their 2025 Black Hole Award, which is awarded to, quote, government institutions that exhibit blatant disregard for the public's right to know. They got that award for their efforts to hamstring GRAMA laws, for their efforts to undermine open records laws. They've made a number of changes to GRAMA and exempted a lot of things from GRAMA over the past few years because they're tired of people finding out what they're doing, and that's why they got the Black Hole Award. But that award tracks with everything else that we're seeing from this legislature. Before we wrap up this episode, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. Leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. That's the best way for new listeners to find the show. Also, remember to sign up for my newsletter. Website is utahpoliticalwatch.news. It's free, but you can also support my work as an independent journalist by becoming a paid subscriber. It's as little as $5 a month. Being independent means I don't have to wake up every day worried about whether some hedge fund billionaire decides to shut me down or not. That's the benefit. But this work does take time and resources, and I can't do it for free, so I have to rely on subscribers like you so that I can keep doing what I'm doing. Investigating and writing stories, recording podcasts, putting out content on social media. I have to rely on you in order to make this possible. If you are a local business and you'd like to support and sponsor this podcast, let's talk. You can drop me an email. It's linked in the show notes. You can also email me if you have some feedback on the show, questions, complaints, hate mail. If there's a guest you'd like to hear from, I would love to hear from you. Hit me up in my email box. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with another episode next week.